Recording in progress.
Hey guys, can I ask everybody to just mute themselves, please?
All right, good afternoon again. If Dr. Clemens and Mr. Story are ready, we can go ahead and begin our session again. This is something that I'm passionate about personally, and incorporating primary sources in our curriculum. I've had a chance to lead other sessions, both for the African American History Task Force, as well as other places throughout the state, and working with teachers and really showing some of the things that we have here at the archives at FAMU, but also just primary sources in general, and how impactful that can be on children when we move beyond just referring to these individuals as just characters in a textbook, but for them to be able to connect with the humanity and be able to think, see how these individuals thought about the movements that they were involved in, the passion that they had, the consequences that many of them suffered, and to get a better sense of what that experience was like during the times that they were living in. So with that being said, I'm gonna bring on my colleague, Dr. Krista Moore Clemens, who will begin her session. Crystal, are you on?
I don't see her, Dr. Young. So let me check with them, and if maybe Mr. Story could go ahead and you guys, and I'll see where we can get her in.
All right, well, Mr. Story, we'll pass it over to you if you would like to begin.
Well, sure, we can do that. Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Story. I am an archivist at the State Archives of Florida. Let me start by saying I'm just thrilled to be here today and to have been invited to take part in today's Summer Institute. Now, I have some things to show you today regarding how the State Archives of Florida, in our mission to preserve and make available Florida's permanent historical public records, can fit in to this essential work of using primary source records, certainly in teaching authentic history. So many times the question is, and let me start up my PowerPoint here. Okay, bear with me one second. Okay, yes, so the question, of course, where do I find primary sources? And the State Archives of Florida are a great resource for that. We have overall more than 50,000 cubic feet of public records, as well as private manuscripts. We have a sizable Florida photographic collection, things like genealogical materials, so certainly not strictly government records. And for educators looking to introduce primary source materials in their classroom, the State Archives are a great place to start. We're certainly not the only place to look, probably even in individual schools, right there on the library shelves, there's going to be collections of speeches, books of photographs. Your local area, the courthouse might have primary source records. Find churches, your universities too. And of course, increasingly today, many of these institutions are making records like these available online. Now, at the State Archives, we have floridamemory.com. This is our digital outreach website, and it's accessible online for free. Overall, the Florida Memory Program has been going more than 20 years now. We've digitized, as you can see here on the slide, more than 500,000 things, this being photos, written records, audio, video, So quite a lot, but for all of that work, this actually represents really only about 1% of our total holdings. That means we've had to be kind of selective, right? The truth is we probably won't ever have every single thing digitized. And so we select the things that we think and hope will be most interesting and most useful to as many people as they can, right? It is in the statute that sets up the State Archives of Florida that specified that these records are open to any person, right? Any person on earth has the right to use our records, and we exist to help facilitate that. So for today, and certainly for our audience today, I hope you'll find particularly useful the Florida Memory Classroom. The classroom is a section of our website designed to help teachers and students explore history using those collections of the State Archives of Florida. It includes a few different types of things. Mainly, there are learning units, there are primary source sets, there are some materials, especially that are geared towards Florida History Day. I know a lot of schools around the state do take part in Florida History Day every year, and so we're here to support that as well. And of course, there are plenty of other resources elsewhere on Florida Memory, right, where materials in the classroom section are going to link you out to for maybe for some further reading or for some related topics. Now, there are a few differences between all of these things. Each primary source set, if we want to think about these as kind of our basic unit, is going to include a short overview. There's going to be a selection of documents and photographs in a research starter. There's also a teacher's guide included in each of these with some questions for discussion in your classroom, as well as links to a document analysis worksheet if you want to really do a close reading of an individual document with your students. A learning unit is going to be a little more substantial in that it will include sometimes several different primary source sets, as well as, beyond the discussion questions. A learning unit will include ready to go, ready-made lesson plans. Now, in my slides here, and actually, Dr. Graham earlier, shown a spotlight on Zora Neale Hurston. We actually do have a learning unit on her work as a folklorist here in Florida, in all of her work with the Federal Writers Project. And so, I'm going to show you a few of my favorite parts of that unit, and then we'll look at the live website for more of an overview of what those learning units look like when you're looking at it live. So as I say, the learning unit will include an overview, who Zora Neale Hurston was, what was the Federal Writers Project, how did she become involved in this project as a folklorist, and how did she wind up traveling around the state and collecting stories. There's going to be photographs, and then of course we see here an excerpt from Hurston's writing herself. The photographs are not necessarily created by her, but right, they're other sources that we've gathered from throughout our collections, right, to assemble and fill out some of these primary source sets. I love, and as Dr. Young was saying, right, these primary sources, they let you connect often on a more personal level with the past. I love this excerpt here from the essay on the Turpentine camp, where clearly Hurston was just visiting with the foreman of this camp, and I think probably stayed with him overnight, right? And just the little details of daily life for this individual. He has all the firewood he wants. He has a vegetable garden, but he does wish the government would send somebody around to make sure people were paid better, right? That is, in my mind, a real clue that, things have changed here, but people in the past are the same as people today, right? That is to me a very, very human moment that comes out of that document and gives me that connection to shall we say, the personalities maybe that create some of the information that we see in historical records. So with that being said, let me do share a new screen now. I do want to show you a live view of the website, and we'll take a little tour of the classroom section now. So here we have floridamemory.com. I hope some of you are already familiar with it. Certainly a lot more there to see than the classroom section, so I'll encourage you to explore on your own time. But for now, we want to navigate to the Learn tab and select the classroom. And here we're going to see a lot of learning units, a lot of primary source sets that I want to emphasize are ready to go. They are free for you to use, and we hope you will use them. So we have units on Mary McLeod Bethune. We have the railroad coming to Florida, and we're going to take a stop here in the Zora Neale Hurston learning unit. So as I was previewing a little earlier, we have an overview here of what you're going to find in this unit, and kind of the top level introduction to what these materials are going to cover. We have more along the lines of photographs and history. Each of these is going to link to other records in our photographic collections. And in fact, kind of introducing some of the characters that we see elsewhere, the people who are generating these documents, onto some background of the turpentine camps themselves, which this learning unit does focus on for the most part. Then you do have access, you know, and I hope it is all easy, right? The essays that I was talking about a little earlier, as well as we have through the Florida Folklore Collection, numerous audio recordings of Zora Neale Hurston. Especially she would often collect, if you will, songs that she heard in her work as a folklorist, and so there are great recordings of some of the songs you would have heard while people were at work, maybe, you know, lining railroads or scraping trees for turpentine, right, to keep that rhythm and to pass the day. And then we do fill it out with Stetson Kennedy's another prominent folklorist here in Florida, with his recollection of working with Hurston and with you know, how she did her work, which is another valuable piece of context for understanding exactly what these sources altogether can tell us. And then, of course, I did mention earlier a couple of lesson plans ready to go. We have on staff here a curriculum coordinator, and so these are you know, these reference relevant curriculum standards. Let's look at the 9th through 12th grade lesson plan. CPALM's approved. There you go. And it's got links right here to everything you need to really take this off the website and use it. And we hope you will. And as I mentioned, the primary source sets and the learning units are a little different. And so you'll see the primary source sets here. So let me get back to my PowerPoint now. So, you know, that is a brief introduction to one of the lesson plans on Florida Memory. And I really want to emphasize, we're here for you, not only the Florida Memory Program, but the State Archives as a whole, right? And so everything on that website is free to use, and there are always more learning units, primary source sets that we're working on. We really hope to keep these coming. And so if there's something you really want to see from us, don't hesitate to let us know. Maybe it's already in the works, or maybe we can get it in the works, right? And I'll also mention, if there's, again, something not on Florida Memory, we have, in addition to the staff of, the web staff, we have a full-time reference unit. I'm a part of that reference unit. And so if there's something that you can't find on the website at all, as I say, that's about 1%. Feel free to send me an email, right? It's my job to connect you with all the records in these archives, all 50,000 cubic feet. And so if there's a topic you're interested in, I hope you'll keep me in mind, and I'm going to do my best to connect you with that information. So with that done, I do want to open up the floor for questions just briefly. Let me get to my chat window. Any questions?
I think what we can do is have Dr. Clemens present, and then I'll field any questions in the chat. If you have any questions, go ahead and start placing them in the chat. And then at the conclusion of both presentations, we'll go ahead and ask ask any questions that the audience.
Very good. Well, thank you, Dr. Young.
Yes, for sure. And I appreciate your presentation. The State Archives has always been a great friend of mine as a person who teaches the research methods courses, both for the undergrad and graduate program in history at Florida A&M. The archives always say, for a historian is our lab. So beyond just using the primary sources as a way to connect with the past, it is also the best place to teach young people of how to really do the work of a historian. A lot of people think historians just know a bunch of random facts and data and old people and dates, right? It's really learning the process of taking these primary sources, taking little bits and pieces from those primary records and developing a narrative, which is an extremely difficult process, but also a very rewarding process. So thank you for that, and thank you for everything that you do at the State Archives. Mm-hmm. With that being said, I'll pass it over to you, Dr. Clemens.
All right, can everyone see my slide? Thumbs up. Okay, good deal. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for allowing me to be in community with you all today. I love talking about primary sources, and I love working with my FAMU colleagues. So my presentation is going to be on using authentic history. I have primary sources, and I'm going to talk to you about two examples, one particularly from progressive Black high schools in Florida and progressive Black high schools in Virginia. Because as I was transitioning from Florida to Virginia, this research and the work that I've been doing with my students has continued. All right, so show of hands, or in the chat, how many people have heard of the progressive Black high schools or progressive Black education? I see some people. So just to give some background information, between 1940 and 1946, the Rockefeller Foundation's General Education Board funded secondary school studies involving 16 high schools within the American Southeast. And so there's this wonderful text that talks about the historically Black high schools in our country. And I found this to be a very useful activity for middle school, high school, and even post-secondary students. And I've got some examples of where I've even engaged some of my doctoral students in primary source analysis research. All right, so we're going to talk today about, say, Lincoln High School in Tallahassee, Florida. It's a It had over 450 secondary students, had a teaching staff of 19 high school teachers, and the program was primarily college prep, social, economic, health, recreational activities, and they had a large connection to Florida A&M University, or Florida A&M College at the time. And it served as the student teacher practice school, or the lab school, even though they had, of course, FAMU DRS at the time. So working closely with the Leon County Public School, Lincoln High School. They received regional accreditation in 1935, and they were already members of the Association of Colleges and Secondary School for Negroes. And so here's a snapshot of the original leader, print administrator at Leon High School, as well as some original images of Lincoln High School. All right. And so I want to be able to kind of transition that and how that connects to using these primary sources. A lot of times students don't realize the historical backgrounds of the middle schools and the high schools in which they attend. And so what I found is that by engaging in a lot of this historical school research especially for middle school and high school students, it allows them to engage in some quality primary source analysis assignments and some quality autobiographical assignments and quality oral history assignments. And I've created a digital toolkit that I'll drop in the chat for you all, which gives you sample assignment guidelines for collecting oral histories, doing primary source analysis, and things of that nature. All right, so that's kind of an overview of what's happening in Florida. Let me take you on what's happening in Virginia and how the two connect. So while the historically Black high schools in Florida had their association, we also see at the same time in Virginia that the General Assembly created a similar association for secondary school principals and administrators to create a consortium of the historically Black high schools in this particular area. And I'm going to take you on a brief website demonstration. And this is an example of how you can engage your students, whether it's through the archival resources that Dr. Story just shared, or even the FAMU Black Archives that we will talk about in the future. So what I did was I engaged the students to come to the website and identify a primary source, right? If you click on any of these materials, you can see the bevy of resources as it pertains to the primary sources. So let's just pick a primary source document, a report to a letter to the social science teachers, right? So the students can go on any given primary source website, they can look at some of these primary source materials and really begin to investigate and interrogate. So what's going on in the social, political constructs of this particular time period? And I'm running through this kind of quickly because I just want to demonstrate how we use the primary sources. All right, if I click back to the website, you'll see different primary sources according to athletics, arts, and the association. Keep in mind when you're providing the historical context for your students at this time, when we're talking about progressive Black education or historically Black high schools in our country, everything is segregated, from our National Honor Society to our sports associations to our student council to any of those extracurricular activities. And so here's an example of how some images of how I engaged my students in doing this work. So I gave them first the assignment guidelines. And I'll pull them up here. I apologize for toggling. So here's some sample assignments. They can do an autobiography. They can do a primary source analysis, meaning pull a primary source from the website and write a 2 to 3 page analysis paper, giving them an opportunity to analyze articles from this particular time period. And then I had them revise their autobiography. I gave them the students the option to do an autobiography or to collect a family oral history. Because what we find with some of our historically Black schools is that many of the students' family members attended these schools, and so they have opportunities to collect oral histories within their own families to learn more about those historically Black high schools within that particular region. So here are some students providing they collected artifacts from the participants. They asked different questions about what it was like to attend these historically Black high schools and things of that nature. So I'm just running through some just images of some of the students and what it was like for them to collect these oral histories, as well as analyze them and present to their class. So as you can see, the students, it took a full calendar year to work with the students from start to finish, but they were really able to dive deep into the archives and dive deep into the interviews of the students who attended these particular high schools. The other thing that we know at this time period is that, nearly 40,000 students went to these historically Black high schools, right? There were some presentations mentioned earlier about the hidden figures, right? We know that Mary Jackson, the aerospace engineer from Hidden Figures, she attended a historically Black high school, things of that nature. And so really providing resources for students so that they can understand how to connect the past with the present. Because as Dr. Young said, students think we just have these random facts in our head and not realizing that there's a bevy of archival material out there to help you connect the dots on folks' lived experiences within any given time period. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and also provide an example of what does a primary source analysis tool look like. When you're engaging in this type of research, you're going to have to provide clear resources to your students as to how do you even analyze a primary source. So what I did for my students was I asked them to do the basic identification. So after you've gone through the material, after you've gone through the archives, what type of source is it? When was it created? Who created it, right? So you're thoroughly interrogating these primary sources so that you can develop the narrative on what was going on at that particular time. I asked the students to dissect the author's intent. I asked them to understand what is the historical context. So what is going on in our case between 1935 and 1946 in these historically Black high schools, whether you're in Florida or whether you're in Virginia. Then I asked students to think through the content of the source. So what are you learning? What ideas are you gaining from this source? What are the historical perspectives? What are the questions that are left unanswered by the source? Then I break down how do we discuss the relevance of the source? And so we use questions like, how might this source confirm or contradict issues raised in other primary sources? Does the source represent any patterns or themes relevant with any other primary resources? So again, just kind of going through primary sources to help students understand the larger picture of African-American history, but also helping them connect the dots between their own lived experiences and the materials that they're reading, whether it's on a archival website or in our textbooks or things of that nature. And I'll toggle back from there. Okay, and here are some links that I'll drop in the chat for you all so that we can talk through just kind of how do you come up with these resources, how do you develop the assignments, and go from there. All right, Dr. Young, I'm going to pass it on over to you if you have any, if folks have any questions.
All right, thank you for that, Dr. Clements. If anyone has any questions, again, feel free to drop them in the chat or if you want to just ask the question, feel free to unmute and ask our presenters any questions that you may have pertaining to their presentations. I did have a quick question for Mr. Story.
Yes, please. Ask away.
Yeah. You know, I think it's great that you all have started digitizing some collections. And, you know, again, my start, because I'm a FAMU grad as well, was at the State Archives. I was researching a lynching actually that took place in Fort Lauderdale for my research methods course. And I remember that the governors had, you know, from that period all had lynching files and things of that nature, but it's just so much down at the State Archives. There's so many different sources. I was just wondering, is that something that you all are continuing to do, to digitize more collections or to develop more digital exhibits?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, we add, you know, sometimes it'll be individual documents we've selected from larger collections, probably at least 100 things a month. And then other times we'll digitize a full series of records. Something we've actually recently brought live on the website as an example are the Florida State Prison registers. They range more than 50 years, this really lengthy and complete run of records. And not only do we have images of the documents themselves available in high resolution, but we worked in part with a number of digital volunteers to make these records fully indexed and searchable in a lot more ways than the ledger itself was originally organized. And so now we can say, well, show me everybody from a certain county, or show me everybody incarcerated for a certain crime or something like that. So we are adding more material to Florida Memory on a continuous basis, and it's going to range from everything from individual photographs to, as I say, full collections from the archives that now you can access anywhere in the world.
Awesome. Hopefully we'll get to collaborate at the Miki time. We just recently entered into a partnership. And again, this is for the entire group with the Smithsonian National Museum on African American History and Culture to digitize our collection. And the idea is to again, just make it more accessible to anyone to be able to research and look at the primary sources and the holdings that we have without you being in Tallahassee. And this is part of a 5 HBCU consortium where they are really pushing us to move more into that digital space and to really develop our digital humanities program here at Florida A&M. So there may be some opportunities to collaborate moving forward. I'm the interim director, so the permanent director will be coming in soon, but I'll still be affiliated with the university and of course with Miki Time as well. So that's awesome, the work that you all are doing. Dr. Clemens, I don't see any questions yet, so I'll continue to ask a few.
There are a few questions in the chat, but I've just been answering them.
Oh, okay. I don't see it.
I'll just read them.
I see it. Never mind.
Okay.
I didn't scroll down. Someone asked, and I guess you already may have addressed this, how do we access primary sources, not just from Florida, but the United States?
So yeah, great question. I just put a link to getting started with primary sources with libraryofcongress.gov. So I would start with the Library of Congress as a good point of, but then also I would think through kind of how you're developing your lesson plans. So if you want to look, if you're doing work with your students that say is based, maybe in Washington, DC, you could do, Moreland Spingarn, right? Some things are at the Howard University archives. If you're doing things that are based, I do particularly 1964 civil rights research. So a lot of the primary sources that I use is within the State Historical Society of Wisconsin, believe it or not. And so you can use those primary source archives. The another wonderful primary source database is the Schomburg Museum of Research and Black Culture. And I'll drop all of those links in the chat, but you have a bevy of resources with all of these collections being digitized at your fingertips. So you can take your students on like virtual field trips just through the archives alone. So I hope that's helpful. And I'll drop those other links in the chat as well.
I'll add to that. It is so much happening with digital humanities, not only just in terms of archives and just being able to pull folders from the NAACP files, for example, dating back, but really curated digital exhibits that also teach you about the past, much like what they're doing at the State of Florida Archives on just an entire myriad of different topics, right? It's an excellent one on Rosa Parks that Say Bergen and Jean Theo Harris is doing. You have the collections, again, the Schomburg is always excellent. Penn State Digital Humanities project is awesome. You know, they just got a bunch of money. Again, these are opportunities in terms of me selfishly developing more historians and digital humanities professionals where, you know, Penn State may have just got $3 million to develop that, right? And so it's a lot of money out there for individuals who are also interested in pursuing careers. And if we can introduce that to the students earlier, that's always something that I'm going to push. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to any of us and we can connect you with some of those sites that are doing really innovative work in the field in developing more accessible collections and exhibitions for students and others who are just interested in learning more about the African and African American past.
I can't stress enough the importance of connecting students with these primary sources, because when I was working with particularly when we're looking at these historically Black high schools, it doesn't matter what city you're in or what state you're in. Many of these schools have closed or their family members have went to those schools. So there's a large personal connection. And I find when you're engaging students, especially young students, 7 through, post-secondary, they need to be able to have the lived experience to make it real for themselves. It's very difficult for students to learn when it's in the abstract. And so when you talk about these locations and these historical markers or walking around in certain neighborhoods, and then you're able to pull those primary sources. It makes the neighborhood come alive. It makes the community come alive. It's also a good tool to better intergenerational relationships. So, right, we always talk about, the youth not respecting the elders or the elders not understanding the youth. Well, when you use primary sources and you're able to interview someone from that time period, you begin to kind of demystify what life was like, and then you begin to build better relations. So then you have students, middle school and high school students who can, maybe see Mr. Smith. Hey, what's up, Mr. Smith? I interviewed you for my oral history project. How you doing today? So really being able to develop relationships, build community, and, knowledge building, of course.
Yeah, and I also think it's great that you brought up the Black high schools, right, from the Jim Crow era, not only from a personal connection again, but when we think about our audience today and teachers and how they still taught African-American history and taught about our past, despite the type of burden that was being placed on them by the state, which again, our current political climate is kind of mirroring some of the things that happened in the past. It's a good book that just came out this past year by Jarvis Given, Fugitive Pedagogy, where you had to have a curriculum that appeared a certain way, but still found ways of incorporating and teaching Black history as Carter G. Woodson. The book is on Carter G. Woodson and the work that now ASALH, Association for the Study then of Negro Life and History, the information that they were putting out and how these teachers incorporated that into their curriculum without the higher ups knowing, right? And so it's a lot of good work out there. I want to thank you for sharing that as well. Any other questions for our panelists?
I see another question in the chat. Is it okay if I read it?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. Dr. Clemens, I live in a small rural county in the north end of state, particularly relevant Black high school now serves as the district headquarters. How can I help those persons beginning to gather the historical content find more assistance? Information says monetary assistance. Great question. So going back to what Dr. Young had mentioned, there's lots of money, whether it's through like National Endowment for the Humanities or your various state historical societies, to begin to digitize these content. So I'm not exactly sure of your area, but if you look up your state historical society, you should be able to find some resources there. On a national level, I would recommend National Endowment for Humanities as a good space to look for some funding to help with that.
All right. Anybody else? Anything that our presenters want to add?
Well, I do want to add to, it does take quite a bit of, pre-work to get you ready to use primary sources in your teaching. And so I would say, don't be afraid to connect with your local universities because like Dr. Young said, it's many faculty members. It's their job to do research. It's their job to have some sort of, connection to community as well. And so if you can find a faculty member at a local university who's is somehow, doing historical research, perhaps you can connect your class with that faculty member to gain any more resources. Or don't hesitate to call on someone to, given everything that we have going on with virtual education, and bring Zoom people in to do demonstrations on how to use the primary sources. Because I know we do get trained in our discipline on how to do that. And if you feel like you need some support, that's probably a good way to bridge that gap.
All right. Well, Dr. Clemens and I have something cooking that we hope that we can announce in the next month or so.
We sure do.
We hope to reach some of you all soon if we have this thing come through that we've been working hard on, and I'm sure that you all will enjoy it. So again, thank you, Mr. Story. Thank you, Dr. Clemens, for providing us with those wonderful presentations. I think it's extremely helpful. If you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out and we'll connect you. And with that being said, I guess we'll move back to the main session and leave the breakouts. And here's the link to join the session over in the chat. So thank you all, and I'll